America's geopolitical supremacy might also be cited as another factor accounting for the success of its universities. In my view, however, these explanations are not sufficient. And this is so because we can also note that there are systems like Singapore, Japan, and many other European countries which are equally wealthy without the levels of research productivity and global influence. So what we need to do is to find a much more complex account of the institutional ethos, norms, and practices of the US universities before their model is applied to the rest of the world in whichever form. My own analysis suggests that the success of American research universities is due largely to their adaptability and to their hybrid form. I'll say a little bit more about both these ideas. They've been able to accommodate new ideas and reform by borrowing heavily from a wide variety of philosophical and pedagogic traditions, reconciling the Enlightenment tradition with the economic pragmatism of America's early industrialists, who viewed the public university and research university as a key engine for economic growth and capital accumulation. From at least the beginning of the 20th century, the importance of research universities was also in the fact that they attached a great deal of importance to critical reason and reflection. And that, in fact, became a source of their autonomy and of their contribution to the formation of national culture, in which literary and cultural canons were not restricted to the realms of elite high culture, as it was in a number of European countries, but extended much more broadly to a diversity of cultural products and traditions in films, music, television, and other, if you like, much more popular cultural fields. In this way, they engage with the changing social, economic, and cultural conditions. It has been this engagement that defined their culture of innovation and reform. Now, central to the hybrid formation of American research universities was a political settlement that they were able to strike between their commercial and cultural concerns. They recognized, even as early as early 20th century, that universities needed to produce commercially useful knowledge, as well as graduates who were able to rotate the wheels of capitalism. But they stressed equally the role universities played in social criticism and cultural development, in exploring and circulating ideas often uncomfortable to dominant groups. Their proud record of innovation in teaching and research, and also service to local, national, and international communities, was based on this political settlement. It was institutionalized in the notions of tenure, academic and institutional autonomy, the state's support for independent research, and their commitment to equality of educational opportunity. In more philosophical terms, in my view, the success of American research universities lies in their pragmatism, which, in my view, became first institutionalized in American universities in late 19th century and early 20th century. During that period, pragmatism emerged as a philosophical movement, developed in the United States, which held that both the meaning and the truth of any idea is a function of its practical outcome. Fundamentalism to American pragmatism is its strong anti-foundationalism and anti-absolutism. The conviction that all principles are to be regarded as working hypotheses rather than metaphysically binding axioms. As modern expression of empiricism, pragmatism has been highly influential in America throughout the 20th century. It has tended to criticize traditional philosophical outlook in light of scientific and social developments. Charles Sanders Peirce is considered the founder of pragmatism. He developed this philosophical tradition as a theory of meaning in the 1870s, holding that an intrinsic connection exists between meaning and action, that the meaning of an idea is to be found in its conceivable, sensible effects, and that humans generate belief through their habits of action. In that sense, pragmatism combined action and thought rather than keeping them separate, as was the case in many different philosophical traditions. William James later gave a further direction to pragmatism, developing it as a theory of truth. True ideas, according to James, are useful leadings, his word. They lead through experience in ways that provide consistency, coherence, orderliness, and predictability. John Dewey was another pragmatist whose influence on educational and social theory is still prevalent in American education. Like Peirce and James, Dewey was systematically an anti-dualist, an anti-binarist thinker who believed that binaries invariably represented a block, an impediment in the production of useful knowledge and in the creation of culture of innovation. Neither materialistic nor spiritualistic monism satisfied pragmatists. As a result, they rejected the binaries between universal and particular, between practical and theoretical, and between knowledge and its application. Now, this tradition was, in my view, institutionalized in universities' thinking. James's empiricism opposed classical rationalism and traditional empiricism. He denied that whatever is rational is real. To reach reality, we must take experience as it exists before it has been manipulated by conceptual thinking, he argued. Now, it is the totality of consciousness, experience permeated with thought, that he argued that was important. Reality is ever in the making. It's tentative. It is provisional, growing where thinking beings are at work. For a pragmatist, this implied a number of important principles that I think became completely and totally absorbed by higher education systems in the United States. And these principles included pluralism, multiplicity, diversity, adaptability, and experimentation. Pluralism satisfied, James argued, our moral nature, recognizes individual perceptions, and therefore is absolutely central to the way organizational life of education and of knowledge production needs to be formed. Now, while it is always very risky indeed, and I would admit that readily, to read the development of social institutions like higher education from the philosophical movements upon which the assumptions upon which they are based may be allegedly based, it is nonetheless wrong to presume, in my view, that they do not influence each other. That is, that there is a very close link between philosophical traditions and the way institutions develop. Indeed, it is possible to argue that there is something within the culture of an epoch or a community that gives rise to a particular set of philosophical ideas, and that conversely, philosophical ideas steer the development of social institutions in a particular direction. So it is, in my view, that American pragmatism was a major source of the development of ideas in the early part of the 20th century that created the political settlement that has defined the ethos and norms of American research universities in particular over the past 100 years. Now, what I want to argue a little later on is that this settlement is now getting slightly frayed and perhaps slightly undone, and that we need to recognize the historical strengths of American higher education in terms of this pragmatism and the principle that they articulate.